Welcome to the 2026 A Year of Quilts from Studio 180 Design. It's June and we're working on the Rapid Fire Hunter Star tool. The instructions for the tool are included, but I prefer to download the instructions from the website, print them up, and put them in a binder. The tools are all multi-sized, and I'm going to be working on the petite tool, which will give me blocks, smaller size blocks. I'm working on a 2-color option, and we'll just make a few blocks for the border of my quilt. The tool gives me multi-sized options, and I'm going to be working on the 5-inch. I have a 5-inch, a 6-inch, a 7-inch, and an 8-inch option for my blocks. The instructions give me full details on how to cut my fabrics. I need a wide strip, a medium strip, and a thin strip or a skinny strip. We'll start with the wide strip, and I'm going to cut it into squares. Now I'm doing a 5-inch block, and here I'm cutting 5-inch squares, and then I'm going to cut them diagonally once for triangles. Each square will result in 2 triangles, and I will use those towards the end. My skinny strip is my trapezoid unit. And I'm going to be cutting the 5-inch strip and use that 5-inch line and line up the top along that top edge, and I'm going to trim. Now I'm a lefty, and I really like being able to switch my hands to cut. If you are limited to cutting with just one hand, I suggest you lay your strips on your cutting mat and rotate your cutting mat. I have some trapezoids cut. I'm going to rotate my ruler, line up that top mark on the edge closest to me and that 5-inch mark on the far side. Rotate my tool again, line up the 5 and the top, and trim. I'm going to sew those trapezoids to the medium wide strip, which is the star point strip. I want the tips facing the top edge, and then I will stack these or snug them in as I'm stitching so that they're really, really close together, and leave about 1/4 inch spacing. I've sewn all my trapezoid units onto my star point, and I need to remember to leave a gap at the top. So what I do is I just take the width of that strip, fold it down diagonally, and it will give me an indication of where to start my sewing my trapezoid unit. I press my seam allowances away from the long strip, from the star points, being careful not to stretch my fabrics. And then I'm going to trim. Now, right-handed trimming, I want to have my strip vertical. I'm going to line up that diagonal line on my tool with the outside edge of my strip, and that little seam intersection is where I'm going to line up the edge of the tool. And I'm going to cut. I'm going to continue across or up that strip, lining up those 2 points only, and just cutting there. I don't want to cut into my trapezoid unit. If I'm doing left-handed cutting, I rotate everything once to the left, line up the diagonal center line and my seam intersection, and trim. Now I'm going to sew those trapezoid star point units. I've switched fabrics here to the second star point. This time my strips, my points are facing down, and I'm going to press the seam allowances all in the same direction. So this time I will need to press toward the long strip, and then I'm going to trim. Right-handed cutting, this time we have our strip set up horizontally, diagonal line on the edge of my strip, and just trim to my seam intersection. Some people want to use those little diamond points to match up, and that's not what we're doing yet. Let's cut another one. And line up the diagonal line on the outside edge of the star strip and the seam intersection, and cut. Now for left-handers, we're rotating to the right, so we have a vertical strip now, and again, diagonal line, my seam intersection, diagonal line, and my seam intersection. And one more. Now I need to trim. My trapezoids have been precision cut already. So I want to trim up my star points. The unit I'm using is 1 3/4 inches for my 5-inch unit. And I'm going to line up my seam intersection or the outside edge of my trapezoid and trim. I'm going to line up the other side. I don't do it all at once. I find it's too hard for me. My fabric is flexible. It's going to stretch and move out of shape. So I have found the easiest way is to line up that seam intersection right there, and then my 1 3/4 inch line, and just trim away my star point. Slide my tool, my ruler, and remeasure at that seam intersection and that star point and trim. Left-handed, we flip everything over, line up that star point and my 1 3/4. Now, if I'm working on a different size block, I would be using a different measurement there, but I'm using the 5-inch petite tool measurements. And I'm not happy with that first one, so I'm just going to go back and trim. Now I'm going to add the triangles that we cut at the very beginning. My trapezoid unit has been precision trimmed, so it goes on top so I can sew an accurate 1/4 inch seam, center it over the triangle with a little tail hanging off. Sew the seam, press the seam allowances towards the triangle units, and do the same thing with my opposite colored triangles. Now I have 2 halves to my block. If I flip it over, we can have a quick look at my seam allowance. I have pressed my seam allowances so that my star point seams go in the same direction. So on the left, they're going away, and on the right-hand side, they're coming towards me. When I position them to sew, those 2 seams will nest perfectly. My block is done. My seam intersections match up perfectly, and I'm going to trim. The corner I'm going to trim is facing up to the top right-hand corner. I'm going to be using the 5-inch block, so that 5 in the circle, and I'm going to find those diagonal lines, all of those seam lines, and match them up. And trim. Lift up my tool, rotate my block, line everything up. Now this time I have a little help. I have a 5.5 inch markings on the side of my ruler, and I can line up those edges with my just cut edge. Make sure my diagonal line is centered and trim. For left-handed cutting, the corner I'm going to trim is facing off to the top left. Again, line up my 5-inch block marker, diagonal line on my tool matching the diagonal line on my block. Line everything up and trim, rotate my block, line up my 5.5-inch outside edge lines with my center diagonal line, and trim and trim. My blocks are done. I'm going to sew them together. And what I want to do is I want to arrange them so they end up with my star points matching. If I look at the wrong side, I can see my centers are, seams are pressed open, and my seam allowances on my triangles are going the same direction. So I have a little cheat that I use so that I can nest that seam intersection and reduce some of the bulk. I'm going to make a little snip about 1/2 inch in, just to the seam line, and I'm going to finger press that seam allowance in the opposite direction, and then those seams will nest. I will pin my top corner, and then I don't need to pin where those seams, triangle seams, nest. I always start sewing from that top corner down to make sure that everything matches exactly. There's my seams, they nest. My seam allowances or my points match perfectly. So I should have star points. I've made a mistake. Have I really? Not really. Let's turn it around. There we go. So I have some star points. And there is my finished rapid fire hunter star border. Happy quilting.